Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. So this week saw a couple of fireworks. Certainly, we had the ensnarement, may I say, of a very, by his own admission, very high senior NDB agent at the military headquarters in Bern, in Switzerland, and he accepted my file. And now it's official that since Wednesday, the NDB knows about my case and has known. He also confirmed to me that he gets complaints about microwave weapons very often. He also gets a lot of requests or complaints about having people coming with the claim that they have a chip in their head. And he also seemed to be of the opinion that I have a chip in my head, which he let slip out. And so what we essentially had this week is a breakthrough, which is essentially a senior Swiss intelligence guy admitting that in Switzerland there's a huge problem with microwave weapons. He does get a lot of requests, and also there seems to be chipping going on, chipping of people where they have chips implanted in their brain, in their head, in different places. And the third admission that he also made, inadvertently, was that they essentially do nuff-all about it. In other words, the Swiss intelligence agencies are aiding and abetting, certainly tolerating, if not themselves committing, crimes against humanity. Now, actually, that discussion will have, many, will produce lots of very productive output. So I think it was one of the most productive 1 hours I had in a long time, that discussion. So it was certainly well invested. His time was very well invested as a service to his country and to humanity, I must say, against his best intentions. But what it also comes down to is now the official fact that there is now public liability and public culpability of the intelligence agencies. They have known. I was shot to bits traveling back from Bern, and I am continually microwaved intensely to my head. As I'm standing here, my head is being pulled. I can't actually focus on what I'm saying because I forgot to put up the paneling here, so I'm being microwaved from through a window that I have just through here, and leading to the block of flats which have the satanic goat on top that appeared the day after the first assassination attempt against me, and has below that flats where the shutters are down in one flat and have been ever since I moved in. And the other flat essentially has activity that seems to also occur in the middle of the night, including 3 a.m., 4 a.m., because the lights are on. So there seems to be some sort of, I would say, training hub for young spies who are doing a shift service and are staying close by. Now, the situation is this continues. So despite being officially told, the Swiss intelligence agency continues to commit crimes against humanity. Willfully, and now it's official, or certainly aiding and abetting and refusing to actually stop crimes against humanity here in Switzerland. At this point, by now, it's now Friday. An intelligence agency doesn't need longer than a few hours to solve a problem like that. The fact that they haven't means that, and it's not a surprise, that they are actively condoning, if not committing, these crimes against humanity themselves. So at that point, as I already said, there's a national emergency. Now it's official, also here in Switzerland. So the NDB is also guilty. They'll also have to represent themselves against charges, for crimes against humanity. And one can also go back. By his admission, he told me that he gets a lot of these complaints, so there must be, hundreds, if not thousands of victims everywhere here in Switzerland. That was an open admission by him. And this means that these large-scale, this decentralized weapon system is also being used on people here in Switzerland. Now, I already knew that to be the fact, but now it's official. So the question is what to do about it when one gets to this point. And people always say, well, if this were true, then there would be all these whistleblowers. Well, the thing is that there are all these whistleblowers. There's Carl Clark, who went public. There's an article on Dr. Paul Baccio. There's Dr. Robert Duncan, who, for all his faults, also, you know, said a lot of things that I think are true. And then, of course, how he deals with victims, and if he continues taking part in those experiments or not is a different matter, but he has said things that are, you know, certainly partially true. So there are all these whistleblowers, yet despite the fact that these whistleblowers exist, despite the fact that there are court cases, this weapon system hasn't been shut down yet. Forgive me, I've just realized I have to plug in the computer, else it will die on me. And the question is, what are we going to do? And it's true, you know, essentially what the intelligence agencies are doing, they are just assaulting people to death, knowing that they will get away with it, doing horrific experiments to them, Nazi death camp experiments to them, hoping that they can get the experiments done and get, you know, what must be huge monetary profits from using the victims, and then essentially make off with the money as quickly as possible. So keep pushing the experiments as long as they can. No amount of public appeals, court cases, or anything, you know, makes them stop. Now at that point, we have an intelligence agency that operates in full-scale Gestapo mode. We have the Gestapo back, now bigger, global, more psychopathic and more deranged and more deadly than it has ever been. So at that point, we have to now take drastic measures. And I mean, ultimately, the ultimate drastic measure to have this shut down is, unfortunately, I'm not inciting violence. I'm just saying, as a systems analyst, if you can't, you know, you have to remove psychopathology at the top. If they can't be brought to come to their senses, they have to be jailed. If they can't be jailed because the judiciary is captured, they have to be assassinated. End of story. And that this is the case shows the example of China. They have executed their head of the intelligence agency. You know, and it's these things don't just happen. And heads of intelligence agencies are hugely powerful. So when they get executed, something really, some drastic measures had to be taken. And all I'm saying is, as these crimes, I'm being shot into my skull as I'm speaking. And as these, forgive me, I have to put up shielding because it is actually really bad. So as these crimes are unfolding, okay, that's a bit better. As these crimes are unfolding, we have to think about what the hell to do. By the way, I don't just do it as a spectacle when I'm on video. I am running around with these shielding panels. So every time I go into the bathroom, I have to cover the window, otherwise they'll shoot at me whilst I'm in the bathroom. When I'm having a shower, I have to make sure I cover the windows, otherwise they shoot into my heart from my neighbor. And at night, I have to bunker down, you know. And I think I'll start taking these panels into the kitchen as well and just, you know, keep them around me. I have to literally walk under a shield on most days. And then for these videos, I try to take off the shielding and try to cope and see how I fare, but it's very difficult. So, now at that point, when it has reached this level of ludicrousness, it's now being publicly discussed. Crimes against humanity that are ongoing, that are premeditated and continuing. We know how they do it. We know who's doing it. We also have a good guess why they're doing it, probably for a lot of money. When this system cannot be brought to a halt in a civilized fashion, we have to take drastic measures. Now, assassination is the last attempt. You know, that's the last step. Jailing is the goal. Certainly removal from the system as quickly as possible and having this stopped. But as I also said, we're now playing on time because the ecosystems are collapsing, the economy is stalling, and this leads to a lot of havoc if it's not solved. We also need to cycle the financial system, and there's the problems essentially that we're stuck on, which is corruption and directed energy weapons. So, given that this is a big Nazi hunt, what I would like to declare now is essentially a public appeal for bounty hunt and the headhunt. This is now a public appeal from a victim for bounty and the headhunt. And I will explain why I think this is a very good idea, and I think why it would be a very good idea for you, whoever you are. You don't have to be an actual headhunter or bounty hunter, hunters. They have them in the US, you know, with guns and, you know, special forces training or something like that. You don't need that to be a bounty hunter in this age and with these sorts of crimes. You just need to have access to Google, have a good deductive brain, and have some time that you're willing to invest for the sake of humanity. Or if you have personal connections, also make them pay, you know. So the actual bounty hunt that I would like to call for is essentially trying to, this is ridiculous, so they are really trying to make my life as impossible as they possibly can. Essentially what I'm asking for is for you to find all the information you can about how these crimes are committed and who's committing them, and collect as much evidence as you possibly can about them in as court-ready a format as you can possibly muster. Okay? And what I'm looking for is essentially who are the perpetrators and how are they doing it? How are they doing it with the technology? And try to find as much evidence as you can. You can take part in this bounty hunt, in this headhunt, if you are, you know, at home taking care of children or elderly parents. You can take part if you're actually, you know, part of special branch. You can take part if you are in the military or in the intelligence agencies, wherever you are in the world. If you've got access to information on these crimes or can deduce your way to them, you know, finding declassified documents and so on, please do. But I'm specifically looking for the perpetrators, the live perpetrators. Who is doing it and how, and as much evidence as possible. And there are a lot of perpetrators, an awful lot. So the motivation for you could be multiple. Number one, these are crimes against humanity. If you take part in this Nazi hunt as a bounty hunter or as a headhunter, this is something you can tell your children and grandchildren about. There's no reason to, you know, once this thing is has been tidied up, there's no reason for secrecy whatsoever. This is now all in the open. We're moving towards 100% transparency here. So you can certainly, and it will be an adventure, really. And every bit that you do will be on par with the resistance fighters of the Second World War. So if you're willing to support human beings who are suffering and are being tortured and who have systematically their life destroyed in a premeditated fashion by hordes of psychopaths and their deranged minions, then please step up to the plate. Please do that now. And there's a second incentive, apart from it being a service to humanity. Certainly for now you will have to do it pro bono, meaning for the public good, for free. But there's also the promise of huge payoffs. And that is because when the court cases start rolling in for these crimes against humanity, there is an awful lot of money to be made. There will be lawyers, attorneys, who will understand that what the victims are, who the victims are suing, is essentially the biggest pool of money going around. And essentially, they can recover their costs, and so can you if you can actually submit expert evidence. So, in a sense, if you take part in this, you would do an investment. You would pay in advance in terms of your time, your connections, in accumulating evidence, putting it together, maybe even taking, depending on your position, maybe even taking small risks or big risks to stop this. But I really encourage you to do that, and that's because we are running out of time. These are non-linear systems. We have to be focusing on this, but we're stuck here. We're stuck here, and this has to be solved. This decentralized weapon system has to be shut down, and we need the help of absolutely everybody. And that is the help of the military of every country, the help of doctors, the help of engineers, right? The help of weapons experts, especially microwave weapons experts, but also neurologists, people who have worked on these chips and smart dust and whatever else might be thrown at victims. And you all need to be working together now for this to stop. Okay? And we also need the help of the people inside the intelligence agency. So all the people who are essentially have infiltrated deep capture. When there's deep capture, then, you know, the good guys become infiltrators. But they need to climb up and they need to access this information. And you have to do it for every victim. So every victim essentially gives you access to a huge potential profit here. Because every victim will have crowds and clouds of perpetrators around them. And certainly in my case, there's an entire trail that leads to many, many people. And I would like to have evidence on that. And you can also use that evidence. Should I be murdered? Should I die? You can continue using that evidence, because with crimes against humanity, you can also, you know, sue people for the benefit of the dead and their families and for those who survive them. So this is essentially society's, you know, cleansing process. It doesn't matter if the victims are all dead. The victims in the Second World War mostly were. This is about actually getting the criminals. And so this is now it. So what you should really do is go out yourself, see what you can gather, and start putting it together into usable format here. And you have to also motivate other people, if you can, your colleagues, your friends and your family to support you, because these are really large-scale crimes against humanity. They really are. And I will explain my case. And if you're working for an intelligence agency or have access to these classified databases, I think there's a lot of information about me being banded around. If you can find me in these databases, try to pull out as much as you can about me and back it up. Please don't sell it on for profit, which is, I think, what everybody else is doing. What you should do is actually collect it as evidence and find a way for the victims to get retribution, for the victims to actually get at the perpetrators. So the current model is that everybody is trying to benefit from the victims. And I'm saying that they are actually the people of highest integrity in our society. And that's just a system tendency. When you have got deep capture, you will have psychopaths at the top who will want to have dumb minions who are no threat to them. And as soon as dumb people get promoted above people of high integrity, who by definition will not be taking part in this nonsense, so they will have to be pushed out, you know, outwards by sacking or by just bullying them out, or being held down, you know, like that. But what that will lead to is that the people who end up targeted are the people of highest integrity, because they are not inside the system anywhere. When that's done to society, it leads to an implosion that will have lasting negative consequences for everybody in that country for generations to come, for decades to come, certainly. This has been observed in communist times. This has been observed in Eastern Europe. And then once a society has been destroyed like that, as soon as you give people an escape mechanism, they will leave. So these areas will also be depleted, as it's now happening, for example, in Romania. People were so fed up with the corruption, they just don't want to live there. They just leave. And whoever cannot leave is essentially just left alone. So this is it. And essentially, we have to solve this problem as quickly as possible. So now I'm putting out a call for these bounty hunters. And I want you to look for the following. So I'll tell you my story. I started being overtly stalked and harassed in Oxford in November 2011, when I attended the High Court case of Berezovsky versus Abramovich as a researcher, as an independent observer. I was stalked all the way back to St. John's College, and there and back to the court. There was street theatre. It looked to me like the British Surveillance Network. And after the end of the court case, it didn't stop. And I'm telling you all this in detail so that at every point there are little hooks where you can get, a toehold. So the people who you can ask, who might know what has been happening to me or what has been done to me, are certainly the security guards at the Rolls building, because part of them, those are members of Metropolitan Police, I think, and or is it maybe City of London Police, because there's a difference. So I think actually, because the Rolls building is on the territory of the City of London, I think that might be City of London Police. And they were certainly roped into doing street theatre. And these are the security guards at the police officers at the metal detector at the bottom of the Rolls building. Then after that, I seem to have been passed to the National Surveillance Network, in the UK, so MI5's department. But in Oxford, I seem to be stalked by locals in their, I would say, 50s to 70s. A lot of the people seemed retired to me, not everybody, but some of them. So people retiring back to Oxford, these are most likely people whose alma mater it is. And they, I would say, have links to MI5, obviously. If they retire back to Oxford, they might also have been hired by Oxford Security Services. And these men, for it was mostly men, have essentially stalked me, and the way they did it, it was essentially, it turned into almost, well, not quite sexual harassment, but it had a sexualized theme in it. So these men were doing it for entertainment. So by that time, I'd already been trafficked, in a sense, through the MI5 surveillance network for the entertainment of retired MI5 officers or retired police or law enforcement people in Oxford. And whilst that was going on, I also had the impression that I was, through that, touching on other, unsavory aspects of what's going on in Oxford. For example, there was one scene where two young boys were made to put on a street theatre. So it was inside a building, but you know what I mean. So a theatre spectacle, whereby they rang my doorbell, and what was always unusual is that it was a building owned by St. John's College, and it had a downstairs bell, and my stalkers and harassers would always be in front of my door, so they would find a way into the building, and essentially by the time they rang my doorbell, I didn't have time to prepare. They would be outside my door already. And this is exactly what happened, and these two young boys said that they were collecting money for charity. And but then when they left, they didn't go to any other flats. I was at the time living on the middle floor of a two-story building, so ground floor first and second floor, and I was on the first floor. And there were a total of 4 flats on every floor, or certainly on mine. And these young boys, after coming to my flat, didn't go to any other flat. They went straight back. And as they left the building, they didn't go to the front, which was Legford Road in Oxford. So that was, I was in a building called HORTON'S House, that's owned by St. John's College. And they didn't go towards Legford Road. They essentially went around the building. They went around the HORTON'S House. And I think at the back, there's some entrances to the houses that are adjacent towards the south. So what that showed me is that those young boys were not collecting money, because they were not interested in going to any of the other flats. You wouldn't really pick my flat as the last one, because I was in the middle of the floors and the flats. So you would essentially, at least check one more flat. You wouldn't just stop at mine. And it was also part of the, there was a harassment routine, so there would be something noticeable happening from my harassers every second or every third day, the latest. And this would be just a recurring theme. So there were stalkers around me every day, but not every day they would put up something that I could actually register and log. And the appearance of those boys certainly fitted the harassment schedule, as I put it. So I would say that those boys were used by my stalkers for this theatre spectacle. But what was extremely bothering me was that they were very young. And it's hard to gauge. They were very, short, very small. I can't really gauge their age. Maybe they were something like in the age bracket, I think 6 to 8, something like that. And essentially primary school age, or maybe even 10, I don't know. So somewhere between 6 and 10, I would put it from memory. And they seemed very, I think, from a well-to-do family. From the way they spoke, the way they behaved, I would put them into middle class, essentially, to, upper middle class. And based on the distance from where I was, Lackford Road, I think the closest school would be the Dragon School. And I really felt afterwards that probably these young boys, it could be that they were just staying with an uncle who just happens to be, XMI5, and who just happens to be entertaining himself during the week whilst he's minding his nephews in taking part. So that it could be that the boys were not from Oxford itself. But it could have also been that they were from Oxford, they were from the local area. And essentially there is, I think, a boarding school, I think it's even a boarding school called the Dragon School in Oxford. And should anybody want to borrow boys, young boys, away from their parents, without being an uncle or a relative, I think the Dragon School would be it. Now that was just kind of a little marker in my head at the time. But then years later, as I was reading up about my harassment, I essentially read on these blog entries called MI5 and MI6 Exposed. There was mention of the Dragon School, as in it was essentially one of those places where they, I would say, farmed boys. They farmed boys for the ritualistic abuse as a preparation for grooming them for MI5 service and so on, MI6 service. And that really, as soon as I read that I was like putting a dagger into my brain, because I suddenly thought back to those boys. I thought back to the very unpleasant feeling I had about that spectacle. Not because of the boys, they were fine, but because of the severe oddness. There was something just dark and creepy about this. I mean, it was, after all, harassing me in a terror campaign, essentially sexualized terror campaign by older men. It doesn't get creepier than that, does it? And but I would say, based on that, and based on the fact that that happened to me, these boys, as I said, could have been from anywhere, but they could have also been from a nearby school where they are, essentially kept. And the fact that there's a boarding school literally just down the road from where I lived, and the fact that that boarding school was also mentioned in MI5 and MI6 Exposed, and given that I was being harassed by MI5, that's a bit too many coincidences for me. And therefore, I would say that those police, those investigators, bounty hunters, headhunters also look into Oxford security services, retired MI5, and potential grooming operations with the Dragon School in Oxford. There probably are grooming operations all around Oxford, all other schools, but especially the Dragon School. And I tell you why. It is because traditionally, these are legacy systems, remember, that we're dealing with. So traditionally, members of MI5 and MI6 would be pooled, certainly from MI6 as I understood it. They claim to be, public schoolboys. So from these posher schools. And the Dragon School, I think, does qualify as a posh school in Oxford, being in North Oxford and all that. So in the Villa area, And I would really urge everybody, this is all I can say about the incident. I haven't witnessed the abuse of boys. What I saw was not in itself abusive. These boys were just made to come to my door with a story. Okay, you know, I think the story was a lie, and I think already that, you know, if I were the parent, I would raise an eyebrow about, you know, any uncle taking their nephew and making them lie for street theatre spectacles. So as a mother, I would have huge issues with that. But in itself, that's not a crime. But I think you should go and have a look at that. So already within my story, there are all these tentacles and all these links. So if you know members of the City of London police, ask them, try to network yourself to the police officers who were on duty in the months of November and first half of December 2011. I mean, it sounds crazy now because it's years ago, but actually it's not that bad because people usually have a schedule, you know, they go to the same places. So those police officers have been asked to harass me. There's the MI5 link. The question is, who asked them? They didn't do anything inappropriate. It was just banter for them. It wasn't terribly traumatizing street theatre. So that's not it. I'm not after those police officers. I'm after the pattern. I'm after the branches that lead up, because those branches will connect to other branches what they, you know, took it then into Germany. I'm certainly raising concerns about what might be going on at the Dragon School with an MI5 and MI6 link here, certainly. Then after watching that in Oxford for a year, I was also stalked everywhere around the country. I was alone at the time. My husband was working in Germany, so for the entire year I was living alone in the UK. And I did essentially sightseeing before leaving the UK, visiting the places that I hadn't had time to visit. And I was stalked everywhere, and there they made sure that I get disconcerted by the stalking. And of course, if you're alone in a country and you go to a place where you don't live, you take your car there, and you're being essentially stalked by a group of men, that is pretty disconcerting. And that went on for an entire year. There was also a break into my flat to rearrange things. Now, I'm telling you all this because now I also know that this is a program. And given that it was in Oxford, and given that MI5 and MI6 are involved, I now strongly suspect that there are some research projects at Oxford as well, which are linked to brain mapping, mind control, social engineering, perception mapping, perception steering, and so on. And as far as I can tell, everybody in this program is getting cash back. So the old guys essentially got, you know, their what must have been sexual titillation, perving titillation out of just stalking me around. You know, it's not hard to guess what the cashback might have been there. And they did seem to enjoy themselves. Then I think there's also the training of young spies, and as I understand, certainly with this brain or mind-shattering MK Ultra or Monarch programming, whatever you want to call it, they do start early with the children, and therefore I think there might be something that they get their trainees, you know, they used me maybe to train young spies. I think MI5 and MI6 are also trying to recruit naive people, university students from Oxford itself, you know. So all that is going on, and it's all intermixed. But I think also I ended up with a skin infection on both my legs after about, I think, 8 months of stalking. And that appeared simultaneously with also a skin infection on my neck. I'm not actually prone to skin infections, or never had any skin conditions, and that appeared suddenly. And I think that already might be part of some sort of medical experiment, because essentially whatever that is, whatever skin infection that is, I didn't manage to get rid of it. And I would say that if you wanted to get into people with nanotech and all this other stuff, fungi or bacteria and this sort of stuff is very good. So I would encourage all bounty hunters, investigators, you know, and headhunters to start searching for things like that. So some sort of dark experiments at Oxford to do with funguses, nanotech, anything like that. What else happened? Yeah, a couple of times in Oxford I had essentially bursts of urticaria that I couldn't explain because I didn't use any, shampoo or shower gel that I hadn't before. I didn't eat anything that I hadn't before. I didn't do anything. It seemed to have happened every single time I went outside in short sleeves or in shorts or in skirts. I don't think it was just something in the air, but someone could have sprayed something on me without me noticing, triggering an allergic reaction or something like that. And that just happened a couple of times. I'm not allergic to anything, and anybody who's been to Oxford knows that the flora isn't particularly wild. So after living in Oxford for 12 years, I don't think there are any, plants suddenly just sending pollen that I'm allergic to. So that's not it. Again, I think there's some sort of something. If you find my file, you will find perhaps something about that. It could be an experiment. It could also be, which I also suspect is going on, essentially these men, in a sick sort of way, titillating themselves with somehow degrading women in any sort of way, physically. Mutilation, maiming, any sort of putting marks on women in any sort of way. Getting into them, degrading their bodies, stuff like that. And the reason why that arises, as sick as that sounds, is simply because of the mind shattering that has been done to MI5 and MI6 agents, and the sheer brutality and psychopathology that they would have experienced through their own training, as we now know actually happens. That would leave people, I think, mentally predisposed to certainly their mind occupying themselves with this sort of stuff. So I think this is the mechanism that brings it about. But please, any investigators, look into that. Try to find whatever you can about these topics. Then after this in Oxford, there was lots of other stuff. They stole my bodily and access card, for example, from my handbag in the senior common room at St. John's College. Also, there was a software, I think, downloaded onto my mobile phone. That was in January. The court case was still ongoing by that time. I think it was the beginning of January 2012. So something that very much looked like some GCHQ thing, because suddenly my mobile phone got a message that there was some sort of critical security update. And I was pretty new to smartphones, at the time. I wasn't really versed in all the ins and outs of Android and so on. And of course, when it is packaged such that it seems to come from your provider, and it seems to be a critical security patch, you just click the link. And I didn't even realize that the link that they sent wasn't further info, it was the download. And most curiously, it started doing something, but then it wasn't a verbose install. It didn't message back. And that's very odd, because most providers do message back and say, okay, download completed or patch applied, something to make it more, even though you can hack this message and put on up a fake one, just to make it more humanly digestible, But this one didn't, so it seemed like a very dirty hack sort of thing. And then I searched online for the name of this, and I found that very few people, just a handful of reports of this, where people asked the very same question of WTF is this? And there weren't really any answers. There was wishy-washy answers that sounded like, no one really knew. The people from the actual, I think it was Orange, was my provider at the time, were amazingly silent. Their support network didn't say anything. And then on forums you said, oh well, that must be some sort of patch from Orange. So I thought, no, that's something from GCHQ. And I think this is when they essentially installed something on my phone and were tracking my smartphone. But at the time I thought, what the hell? I didn't know that I was on this program, and I didn't know how to get rid of it. And I just thought, they might as well. I mean, it's like everybody knew that GCHQ is tracking everything anyway, so who cares? And so that happened. So there's some sort of lots of information about what was on my phone at the time that must be knocking around in databases, certainly from January 2012. Then also, for example, there must have been something done to my Oyster cards, because they started raising alarms on the tube and tube stations. So again, MI5 shenanigans, you know, but my Oyster cards were set to what seemed to be like terror alert, because when I went through a barrier at one point, an alarm was just set off. Another time I went through a barrier and saw a red light go, you know, light up in the cabin where the personnel was, but it was empty at the time. And then I just went down to the platform, and then shortly after I saw someone come down, literally super furious, and have a massive go at someone else who was, you know, staff on the platform, keep pointing back at the barrier and just saying something, and then just, you know, going off in a huff. That was so extreme. And if you know the you know, disposition of the British, you know that they're not gonna, you know, tick out and have a go at somebody in public like that. So it must have been pretty urgent, and I think it must have been that I passed through the barrier, I set off some alarm, and there was no one there to actually watch me or check up on me. I just went into the train station anyway, without people keeping an eye on me, and something like that. That would have fitted the entire scene. Maybe it was also street theatre, you know, it could be. I don't know. But either way, you know, my Oyster cards are most certainly logged. You will find information on that. Maybe you can find out who logged them. And I know it's MI5, but that's not the point. I'm after names, because they already set up crimes against humanity. That was the beginning of my trafficking. That was the beginning of my trafficking. And as I said, I think already at that time, medical experiments were being applied to me. And afterwards it would turn out that medical experiments and freakish Nazi experiments would be, you know, applied to my family, my extended family, and to my friends. And you will probably find information on that as well. So, okay, that's Britain. Then after a year I moved to Germany. I was stalked and harassed in the north of Germany. And then we moved down to Munich Zolln. There it went ballistic. So that was clearly some sort of BND involvement. And you should find lots and lots of information. There was also, my medical care was subverted. You should be able to find out what has been done to me. You can hack your way, you know, buy your way into this. Remember, these are crimes against humanity. What I want is to have essentially an evidence trail for court use against Nazis. So if you can find out what the Nazis did to me and get it to my court case, you know, these are huge crimes against humanity. And if you could do the same thing with other victims. So in Munich, I was also, spectacular things were that I was shot. I don't really have to mention the doctors who were infiltrated because I know their names, right? But certainly what has been done to me is not clear to me. So that's something. I was also shot at from a helicopter on the 1st of July 2015. If you can find out, this was essentially Munich Zolln, okay? This was, I would say, before midday, roughly. So if you can find out all the helicopter traffic, unmarked helicopter traffic, this must have been military BND sort of helicopter, find out which helicopters were up in the air and why and where on the 1st of July 2015. That's the helicopter that attacked me on my rooftop terrace. What else? There's lots and lots of other, you know, nuggets that you can. I mean, I try to put out as much evidence as I possibly can about what happened to me, so that you can start looking at all the different branches. But remember that all these people who took part are contributing their bits, you know, their bit to committing crimes against humanity. So as much as even after decades we had in Germany court cases about, you know, accountants and I think guards at the concentration camps. Yes, this matters. It matters. You don't have to be, you know, an actual person pulling the trigger. It's enough that you were taking part. So, what else can I tell you? Then we moved from Munich zone. Oh yes, there my business was also infiltrated. People at the Arbeitsamt, because I first went there trying to get the Gründerzuschuss to start my business. They took part in the harassment, not the people working at the Arbeitsamt. They just allowed sort of these shady people to actually use the building itself for theatre. There was a policewoman called Elisabeth Zumbruch, and she essentially took part in harassment theatre at a meetup called Female Entrepreneurs in Science and Technology. And so Elisabeth Zumbruch, she knows whoever hired her and got her roped into this is connected to these crimes, because by that time it was clear to absolutely everybody that I'm innocent. The fact that they singled me out and continued to harass me already shows that, you know, something is going wrong already at that level. And Elisabeth Zumbruch, she was Kripo Hamburg, so crime squad Hamburg, and moved to Munich and was working for the art department. Okay, now art department, she at that meeting even told us that her colleague was working on that case. Oh God, what was the guy's name? It was essentially the find of, I think, 2,000 works of Nazi looted art. And the name of the guy who hoarded that escapes me. He was the son of an art dealer who essentially was dealing in the art confiscated by the Nazis, or, you know, sold under pressure of the Nazis. And he had all these paintings, I think 1,500 or 2,000 of them, and it was found, I think, by tax inspectors, and the Munich art department of the crime squad confiscated the paintings and then sat on them for 2 years, not telling anybody. That was pretty odd. And I think all the victims and their families complained because, you know, for obvious reasons. If something like that gets uncovered, you would think that they would put out a call and ask for people to come forward. But anyway, that was very odd, and I think in the end the paintings got donated to maybe a museum here in Bern or something. So, you know. But anyway, that was a close colleague of Ms. Zumbruch. She herself wasn't on that case. However, what I'm trying to say is that given the surprising irregularity with that, of discovering 1,500, you know, paintings of or more of looted Nazi art and being quiet about it for 2 years, seems to somehow, you know, irregularities always hint at some sort of capture. Either capture through stupidity or capture through other means, but it's capture for sure. So there seems to be some capture in the Munich art department, shall we say. And I think from other victim cases there's plenty of evidence for just capture in the Munich police, full stop. The fact that Frau Elisabeth, Miss Elisabeth Zumbruch was stalking me, or not stalking me, but actually harassing, taking part in harassment theatre, at this odd meetup, being oddly at that meetup is another link. If anybody can ask Miss Zumbruch what the hell she was thinking she was doing there, and who the hell got her to do what she did, it would be nice. Then also at that meeting was a lady who I personally suspected to be actually a BND agent named Gro Gerd. I think she can be found on meetup.com. She has essentially, after appearing at that meeting, also magically appeared at all the other meetups that I attended in Munich, including the Lean startup. She didn't actually want to start a company, but she was there, I think, 3 or 4 times with me. She also seemed to be a relatively, comparatively senior handler, so there were sometimes events when I saw clear indication that she was handling or steering kind of guided theatre setup with younger people in their, I would say, late teens, early 20s. So, and she was previously, I think, in the Ukraine, and was then I would say, stationed in the Ukraine, and then was pulled back after just, I think, weeks before it all kicked off. So the timing seemed to indicate some sort of knowledge of what's going to happen. And it very much seemed to me like, an agent who was stationed in Ukraine was, called back. That was my impression. I don't want to libel her, but based on what I have seen, I would say that she is an agent. Based on how she behaved towards me, I would say she's an agent. Based on also the fact that she was there at this other meetup together with Elisabeth Sombourg, I would say that certainly Miss Sombourg and Grogert didn't fit the picture. So those are two links. If anybody can find out who is paying them, who's handling them, who got them to do what they did, that would be good. And it just goes on and on. So I'll think of, these are the people who I could identify as actual hooks. The rest was street theatre and many other things that I still have to remember and, write up in detail. And then we moved to Switzerland here, and now here in Switzerland it gets interesting, because essentially my harassers and my stalkers are in flats within 50 meters of my home. So at this stage I don't really want to make my address public. Maybe I should, maybe I just shouldn't worry about it, but within 50 meters there is essentially, yes, a satanic life-size goat appeared on a rooftop. Below that seems to be some sort of shift service that's up until the early hours of every day. Then also the shutters are down permanently on actually on both flats, but one is, sometimes has the shutters up. The other one, the shutters are permanently down and have been ever since we moved here over a year ago. And here in Canton Zurich, I am being shot to pieces. Absolutely shot to pieces. What they've also done to me is vibrate my arm. I'm not sure if that's done with many, many little implants or some sort of nanotech, I have no idea. But essentially vibrate my arm into paralysis. They essentially have the ability to to give you the sensation of pins and needles, or just electromagnetic just tingling sensation on other parts of my body. And when they vibrate my arm, it starts off like that, essentially like an electromagnetic sensation, starting sometimes in the fingers, sometimes in other bits of my hand, and then it spreads, and before I know it, I really feel like my entire arm is vibrating, all the way to at first it was just my lower arm, then my entire arm, and then now also past the shoulder, essentially. And they have done that several times. They have also tried to, well, not quite drown me, but get me into distress in the middle of the swimming pool. So they are able to set that off also underwater. This could be chips, this could be something else. I have no idea. I don't really, So that happened. Now they are literally, my head is being shot into non-stop. My head is also, when I'm giving interviews, my head is being burnt up from the inside. It feels like it. If I don't cover my head with, if I don't put shielding towards my neighbors, if I don't cover my head with some form of metal, and I know aluminium isn't great, but up until now I didn't even know I've got access to copper. I didn't know. I just essentially today Karen Stewart told me that yes, you can actually buy sheet copper. I didn't know. In particle physics we had it in cabling, and we had plates of copper, and they were prohibitively expensive. So much so that it was worth for people stealing it. And we had a problem with the theft of copper in the experiment. So it didn't even occur to me that that's possible. But yes, but otherwise, actually, aluminium does help. So I'm being microwaved. I can hear it on this frequency sensor, which is the EM Fields Acousticom 2. It sounds like metallic crackling, metallic scratching sound. That in my experience, is some sort of microwave beam that feels unpleasant. So, and it's not, the intensity doesn't actually show any large deviation. It is the sound, the particular sound, which kind of makes me think that what I'm actually measuring is the fringe, a fringe beam. So the main beam might be outside this, you know, the 200 megahertz to 8 gigahertz, but I'm certainly picking up signals. And essentially here, in Switzerland, I have survived an assassination attempt. That was 3 days after my first High Court hearing. Any sort of agents who know who the person was who essentially delivered the death threat to me the night before, that was the 18th of May, traveling from London Heathrow. I think I took the easy bus because I realized that all other stagecoaches were, you know, essentially on National Express were not the right timing. So that was the EasyJet Express, big bulky guy, kind of special branch format, and I think it was a young lady in her early 20s maybe. I think black lady. She also joined, so it was the typical, you know, somehow senior handler, young trainee sort of setup. She sat in the back pretending to sleep and was holding a mobile phone as close as she could towards me in the back. So, okay. But anyway, he certainly, you know, was the person who was going on about did they kill Diana. And 3 days later, I almost snuffed it on the Swiss motorway traveling through a tunnel at 100 kilometers per hour. So that was... hang on, so the 19th, exactly the 22nd. So any information on this, essentially, the death threat, who it was, in the agent world, it should be possible to find out. Who were the people who were trying to kill me on the 22nd of May 2016 on the motorway near Lucerne. Then I've got a telephone record of a death threat 3 days after my last High Court hearing. But there I've got the telephone record. And what else? Yes, then also that's now Swiss, very Swiss. Who were the people who were trying to kill me? I think it was the 23rd of January, if that's a Monday. Let me just check. That was... Oops, sorry. Let me give you the right date, the precise date. Yes, it was the 23rd of January because that was a Monday. I was taking skis back to Davos, which my husband had hired, and he didn't make it back in time for the closing time of the hire place. So he took them home and I took them back to Davos on Monday, the 23rd of January. And I did a trip to Davos and I was coming back what time? 7-8 p.m. Was it 7? Yeah, something like that, I think I would say. 7 p.m. driving down the Serpentines. Or was it maybe earlier? I don't remember it to be pitch black. It wasn't pitch black. It was, maybe it was just 6 o'clock or maybe even just 5. I can't remember. So somewhere between 5 and 7 p.m. there was a military police vehicle parked on the Serpentines coming down from Davos, traveling to Zurich on the 23rd of January. Military police van parked, essentially I was driving down the Serpentines, it was parked on the other side in the middle of the street, or on the road, and two guys got out. So I think the military police was doing something in the forest nearby. I cannot tell if I was shot into the head from the car behind me or from the forest. I really can't tell. Could have been, you know, electromagnetic sniper guns put down in the forest and essentially timed trigger and so on. No idea, but I certainly, there were people who, you know, were desperately trying to get me across the barrier that day. So who was that? Can you find out? Some links to Swiss military police. After, I think 3 days or a couple of days before that, I had contacted the Swiss military police, asking them for help, asking them to stop try to help me stop the microwave attacks against me, asking them if they had any measuring devices that I could take measurements in my flat that were essentially, you know, good for military weapons to detect them. They passed me to the BARCOM, Bundesagentur für Kommunikation, so they weren't very helpful. But anyway, so these are the links. These are the links about my case. I am being stalked non-stop here. There were people certainly swarming when they were trying to get me into distress in the middle of the swimming pool here in Zurich. And you can also find, so I went swimming a couple of times, and I think one of the very few, sorry, I'm just stepping on things here. One of the very first few videos I made, one of the comments, when I put out essentially a question for what are the frequencies they are using on me. One of the comments in the comments section below the video was, you know, here the frequencies they are using are these, very detailed list of just random numbers, and then the question was, does swimming help? Now that was actually targeted harassment because there was nothing, I've never said anything about swimming, and so, you know, you can imagine that the people who have written that comment certainly are tied to the people who have been surveying me in the swimming pool as I went swimming, and who therefore very likely also connected to the people who were watching me as I was, you know, essentially my arm was vibrated into paralysis. They did that twice in the swimming pool. Who are these people? Names. I want names. Who are their handlers? Who are the handlers who are doing this? Which university is involved? Where does my data go? Who is involved? Who is farming the data of me? So I'm looking for a group of essentially pervy old farts in Oxford. Who were those men? Can you find out? Who are the handlers? Who put me on a list? Who's keeping me on a list? Who put me on a list in Germany? Are they using the same list? Who put me on a list, or is it the same list here in Switzerland? I think it's probably the same list, but I want to know. And I want evidence for this. Can you find out anything? Do I have chips in me? What have they done to me? If I've got chips in me, who is reading them out? There must be certain frequencies I must be broadcasting to cell towers. Oh yes, and I was also sharp shot something into my arm. So, is someone reading out the frequencies? Find out. Find out. So, that is it. As I said, you can do it for humanity. Please, I am a victim. I mean, if you are an intelligence agent, you do have the ability to profit from this information. But I ask you not to do that. That's what everybody does in default mode. I ask you to actually take that information and help me find these criminals and make money from bringing these criminals to justice. We have to asset strip them. Yes, there has to be compensation. And with crimes against humanity, you can just imagine what's going to happen. Because once we get court cases, don't worry, there will be psychopaths, as in lawyers, who will be gladly taking these people apart. So MI5 and MI6 are not the only psychopaths going around. So anyway, any sort of information you can uncover, I urgently need that. And also the same is true of all other victims. If you can find out what has been done to them, collect the evidence, please. And there will be opportune moments to either leak information to me directly that you help me along to get, to justice. And certainly there will be, I think, very profitable occasions where you could submit batches of evidence to assist the investigation of crimes against humanity, I think. So please, if you could get on the case. So it's very late. I'm sorry, this was just essentially the summary of my case. But, that's where we are. So I have to go to bed now because it's now 2:30 a.m. But try to find out as much as possible who is doing this to me here in Switzerland now. Who is in these houses? Who are they training up? Who are the senior handlers? Who has authorized this? Who has authorized this? Who is profiting? which universities are involved, and who's reading out my medical data, my life sign data, who's reading out my brain print, using my brain print and playing with me. You know, who is actually moving my muscles, triggering muscles and pulsing muscles, you know. Any sort of information like that, I think, would be very good to find out, to bring these criminals to justice. So thank you very much. I'm signing off from the concentration camp here in Switzerland. I have to take my shielding and lie down. My head has been cooked so hard trying to give this talk that I really can't last much longer. So thank you for listening, and bye for now.